The pistol shot echoed through the mountain canyon just as Beatrice Palmer reached for the last canteen of water, and she knew in that instant that her carefully constructed life of solitude was about to shatter into 1,000 irreparable pieces. She dropped flat against the red rock, her heart hammering against her ribs as dust kicked up where the bullet struck mere inches from her hand. Her horse, a stubborn mare named Copper, had bolted down the trail 5 minutes earlier when a rattlesnake crossed their path, leaving Beatrice stranded in the Colorado wilderness 3 miles outside Trinidad with nothing but her rifle, her determination, and now apparently someone with a grudge and decent aim. "Come out slow and keep your hands where I can see them," a male voice called from somewhere above her position. The accent was distinctly Texan, rough around the edges like sandpaper on raw wood. Beatrice gritted her teeth, calculating her options. She could try to reach her rifle, propped against a nearby boulder where she had set it down to retrieve the canteen. She could call out and hope whoever was shooting at her would listen to reason. Or she could run, though the open terrain offered little cover and her long skirts would tangle around her legs before she made it 20 feet. "I said come out," the voice repeated, and this time she heard the distinct sound of a hammer being cocked. "I am unarmed at present," Beatrice called back, keeping her voice steady despite the fear coursing through her veins. "And I have no quarrel with you, whoever you are." A long pause followed, and then the sound of boots on stone. Beatrice turned her head slowly, watching as a figure emerged from behind an outcropping of rock about 30 yards upslope. He was tall, that much she could tell even from a distance, with a dark hat pulled low over his face and a rifle held expertly in both hands. He moved with the careful precision of someone who had spent years learning to read danger in every shadow. As he drew closer, details emerged. He wore dusty trail clothes, a leather vest over a faded blue shirt, and his face beneath the hat was sun-weathered and sharp-featured, with several days' worth of dark stubble on his jaw. His eyes, she noticed as he approached within 20 feet, were an unusual shade of gray-green like sage after a rainstorm. "You are Beatrice Palmer," he said, and it was not a question. Her stomach dropped. "Who wants to know?" The man stopped about 10 feet away, studying her with an intensity that made her skin prickle. "Name is Hayes Yancy. I am a bounty hunter out of Santa Fe, and I have been tracking you for 3 weeks." Beatrice closed her eyes briefly, feeling the weight of the past crash down on her shoulders like an avalanche. Of course, someone had finally come. She had been foolish to think she could simply disappear into the Colorado territory and start over, that the life she had fled in Kansas would not eventually catch up to her. "I see," she said quietly. "And what exactly is the bounty for?" Hayes tilted his head slightly. "You tell me." "The poster says you are wanted for theft of property valued at over $3,000 from one Silas Moreland of Dodge City. Says you were his intended wife, and you ran off with his money and his grandmother's jewelry." A bitter laugh escaped Beatrice's throat before she could stop it. "His intended wife. Is that what he is calling it now?" Something shifted in Hayes's expression, a flicker of uncertainty that was gone almost as quickly as it appeared. "You saying that is not accurate?" "I am saying," Beatrice said, pushing herself up to a sitting position slowly with her hands still visible, "that Silas Moreland is a liar and a brute who kept me locked in his house for 4 months after my father sold me to him to pay off gambling debts. I am saying that every piece of jewelry I took belonged to my own mother, which Silas stole from me when I first arrived. And I am saying that the $3,000 was money he owed to the girls who worked in his saloon, wages he refused to pay while he drank and gambled away their earnings. I took it and I distributed it to them before I left Kansas. So if you are hoping to recover any of that money, you will be sorely disappointed." Hayes was quiet for a long moment. His rifle still pointed in her general direction but no longer aimed directly at her heart. "That is quite a story." "It is the truth," Beatrice said, meeting his gaze steadily. "But I do not expect you to believe me. You have a job to do, and I am sure the bounty money spends just as well regardless of whether I am guilty or innocent." The words came out sharper than she intended, edged with all the bitterness and anger she had been carrying for the past year. She had been 19 years old when her father had handed her over to Silas Moreland like she was livestock, barely old enough to understand what was happening before she found herself trapped in a nightmare. It had taken her 4 months to plan her escape, 4 months of enduring Silas's unpredictable temper and wandering hands, 4 months of watching him mistreat everyone around him, while the so-called respectable citizens of Dodge City looked the other way because he had money and influence. Hayes lowered his rifle slowly, though he did not holster it. "The bounty is $500, he said. "That is a substantial amount of money for a working man." "I am aware," Beatrice said. She thought about her little room above the general store in Trinidad, the job she had secured helping Mrs. Chen with bookkeeping and inventory. She thought about the friends she had made, the quiet life she had been building. All of it was about to disappear, and there was nothing she could do to stop it. "However," Hayes continued, and the word made her look up sharply, "I have been doing this work for 5 years now, and I have learned to recognize when something does not sit right. And this bounty, Miss Palmer, has been setting off warning bells in my head since I first picked it up." Beatrice's heart began to beat faster, but she forced herself not to hope. "What do you mean?" Hayes moved to lean against a boulder, finally pointing his rifle at the ground instead of at her. "For one thing, Moreland put out this bounty personally instead of going through the law. That is not unusual for a wealthy man who wants something done quickly, but it did strike me as odd. For another, when I stopped in Dodge City to verify the details before heading out after you, I got a lot of interesting reactions when I mentioned Moreland's name. Fear, mostly. Some disgust. Nobody had a good word to say about the man, though most were too scared to say much at all." "He owns half the town," Beatrice said quietly, "including the sheriff. So I gathered." Hayes pulled off his hat, running a hand through dark hair that was slightly too long, curling at his collar. "I also spoke to a woman named Mary who works at the boarding house. She said to tell you hello if I found you, and that the girls are all doing much better now." Beatrice felt tears sting her eyes unexpectedly. Mary had been her only friend during those awful months, an older woman who had worked for Silas for years and had tried to protect Beatrice as much as she dared. "Mary said that, she did. She also told me what Moreland did to the last girl who tried to leave him." Hayes's voice had gone hard. "She was found in the river 3 days after she disappeared. The sheriff ruled it an accident." The tears spilled over now, and Beatrice did not try to stop them. She had known about Rachel, had heard the whispers. It was part of what had made her so desperate to escape, so careful in her planning. "I see," she managed. Hayes was quiet for a moment, then he made a decision that Beatrice saw cross his face like weather changing. "Here is what is going to happen, Miss Palmer. My horse threw a shoe about a mile back, and in the chaos of me climbing up this canyon to get a better vantage point, I lost your trail completely. By the time I figure out which direction you went, you will have a solid day's head start. I am going to have to wire Moreland in Dodge City and tell him that I lost you, and that I am heading back to Santa Fe because this is not worth my time anymore." Beatrice stared at him, afraid to believe what she was hearing. "Why would you do that? $500 is a fortune. It is, Hayes agreed, but I have never brought in an innocent person, and I am not about to start now, especially not to hand a woman over to a man who will most likely kill her. He pushed off from the boulder and held out a hand to help her up. Come on. Let us go find that horse of yours before she decides to head all the way back to town without you. Beatrice took his hand, letting him pull her to her feet. His grip was strong and calloused, the hand of a man who worked hard for everything he had. I do not understand, she said. You do not even know me. How can you be certain I am telling the truth? Hayes retrieved her rifle and handed it to her, which spoke volumes about his trust or his confidence in his own abilities. Because I have made a career out of reading people, and you do not have the look of a thief. You have the look of someone who has been running scared for a long time and is exhausted from it. He started down the trail, expecting her to follow. Also, because Mary gave me a letter to give to you if I found you, and after reading it, I knew everything I needed to know. You read my private correspondence. Beatrice hurried to catch up, her curiosity overriding her indignation. I did, Hayes said without apology. And before you get too angry about it, you should know that it is the only reason you are not in shackles right now heading back to Kansas. Beatrice fell silent, processing this information as they picked their way down the rocky trail. The afternoon sun beat down on them mercilessly, and she was acutely aware that her canteen was still sitting back where she had dropped it. As if reading her mind, Hayes unhooked his own canteen from his belt and offered it to her without breaking stride. Thank you, she said, taking a careful drink. The water was warm but welcome. They walked in silence for another 10 minutes before Beatrice spotted Copper grazing contentedly in a small meadow, apparently having gotten over her fear of snakes. Hayes whistled softly, and to Beatrice's surprise, the mare's head came up, and she actually walked toward them instead of bolting again. You have a way with horses, Beatrice observed. I have a way with most animals, Hayes said, running a hand down Copper's neck and checking her over for injuries. People are generally more complicated. Beatrice could not argue with that. She watched as Hayes made sure Copper was sound, his movements efficient and gentle. He was not what she had expected from a bounty hunter. Most of the men of that profession she had encountered had been rough, cruel individuals motivated solely by money, and with no regard for justice or mercy. Hayes Yancy, on the other hand, had just let a $500 bounty walk away because he believed her story. What will you do now? She asked, as he finished his inspection and handed her Copper's reins. Hayes looked at her for a long moment, and she had the uncomfortable sensation of being thoroughly evaluated. That depends on you, I suppose. On me. Moreland is not going to stop looking for you just because I failed to bring you in, Hayes said bluntly. He will send someone else, and the next man might not be as particular about the truth as I am. You are not safe in Trinidad anymore, Miss Palmer. You are not safe anywhere in Colorado territory, not really. The fear that Beatrice had been holding at bay came crashing back. Then what am I supposed to do? I cannot keep running forever. No, you cannot, Hayes agreed. He leaned against Copper's saddle, crossing his arms over his chest. But you could disappear so thoroughly that Moreland would never find you. New name, new town, new life entirely. I tried that already, Beatrice pointed out. You still found me. Because I am very good at what I do, Hayes said without false modesty. But if someone was helping you, teaching you how to cover your tracks properly, it would be a different story. And if you were somewhere remote enough, far enough from Kansas, that Moreland would not think to look there, you might have a real chance. Beatrice narrowed her eyes. Are you offering to help me? I might be, Hayes said. I have a cabin up in the San Juan Mountains, about 40 miles west of here. It is isolated, only accessible by one trail that I have made deliberately difficult to find. I use it as a base between jobs. You could stay there for a while, let things cool down, figure out your next move." "Why would you do that?" Beatrice demanded. "You do not know me. You have no reason to help me beyond what you have already done." Hayes pushed off from the horse and took a few steps away, looking out over the canyon. "My sister was in a situation similar to yours once," he said finally, his voice carefully neutral. "She was 17, engaged to a man my father had chosen for her. He was wealthy and respected, and everyone thought she was lucky to have caught his attention. But he was cruel and controlling, and when she tried to break off the engagement, he beat her badly enough that she lost the hearing in her left ear." Beatrice drew in a sharp breath. "What happened to her?" "I helped her disappear," Hayes said. "Took her to live with our aunt in California, far away from Texas and far away from him. She is married now to a good man, has 3 children, and is happier than I have ever seen her. But it easily could have gone another way if someone had not intervened." He turned back to face her. "So yes, Miss Palmer, I have a reason to help you. I cannot save every woman in a bad situation, but I can save you, if you will let me." Beatrice felt something shift in her chest, a loosening of the tight knot of fear and desperation she had been carrying for so long. "I do not even know if I can trust you," she said, but the words lacked conviction. "No, you do not," Hayes agreed. "But right now I am the best option you have got." He was right, and they both knew it. Beatrice looked down at her hands, at the calluses she had developed from her work at the general store, at the fading scar on her wrist from where Silas had grabbed her and twisted hard enough to break the skin. She thought about Rachel, found in the river. She thought about Mary and the other girls, still trapped in Dodge City under Silas's control. She thought about the choice in front of her now, the leap of faith she would have to take. "All right," she said quietly. "I will come to your cabin. But I want to be very clear about something, Mr. Yancy. I am not some helpless damsel who needs a man to rescue her. I got myself out of Dodge City with no help from anyone, and I have been taking care of myself just fine for almost a year now. If I accept your assistance, it is because it makes practical sense, not because I am incapable of managing on my own." A smile tugged at the corner of Hayes's mouth, the first she had seen from him. "Duly noted, Miss Palmer. I would not dream of suggesting otherwise." "And another thing," Beatrice continued, warming to her theme. "I am not going to sit around your cabin like a prisoner waiting for you to tell me what to do. I will earn my keep. I can cook, clean, mend, keep books, shoot reasonably well, and I know my way around horses and livestock. I will not be a burden." "I did not think you would be," Hayes said, and there was something in his tone that might have been approval. "And for the record, I am not in the habit of keeping prisoners. You would be a guest, free to leave whenever you choose. Though I would strongly advise against leaving until we have figured out a permanent solution to your Moreland problem." Beatrice nodded slowly. "Then we have an agreement." "We do," Hayes said. He glanced up at the sun, which was beginning its descent toward the western horizon. "We should get moving. We can make it to Trinidad before full dark, and we will need to collect your things and get you out of town before anyone thinks to ask questions. The fewer people who know you are leaving, the better." They made good time back to Trinidad, arriving as the last rays of sunlight painted the mountains gold and purple. The town was small but prosperous, situated at the crossroads of several important trails and benefiting from the coal mines in the nearby mountains. Beatrice had been happy here, or at least as happy as she could be while constantly looking over her shoulder. Hayes waited with the horses while Beatrice slipped into the general store through the back entrance. Mrs. Chen was in the storeroom counting inventory, and she looked up in surprise when Beatrice appeared. "Beatrice, I thought you had gone for the evening, the older woman said in her precise, accented English. I am sorry, Mrs. Chen, but I have to leave, Beatrice said, the words tumbling out in a rush. Something has come up, family business, and I have to go tonight. I know this is terrible timing and I am leaving you in a difficult position, but I do not have a choice. Mrs. Chen set down her pencil and studied Beatrice with sharp eyes. Is someone after you, child? Beatrice hesitated, then nodded. Yes, someone from my past, but I have help now, someone who is going to make sure I am safe. I just need to get my things from my room. Mrs. Chen was quiet for a moment, then she reached into her apron pocket and pulled out a small cloth bag that clinked softly. This is your wages through the end of the month, plus a little extra. You are a good worker, Beatrice Palmer, and a good person. I hope you find what you are looking for. Tears threatened again, but Beatrice blinked them back as she accepted the bag. Thank you, Mrs. Chen, for everything. You have been kinder to me than you had any reason to be. Kindness is not something that requires a reason, Mrs. Chen said. Go now quickly and be safe. Beatrice gathered her few possessions from her small room, everything she owned fitting easily into one worn carpet bag. She changed into her riding clothes, the split skirt and sturdy blouse that were far more practical than the dress she had been wearing. Then she slipped back down the stairs and out into the darkening street where Hayes waited. He had acquired a pack horse in her absence, and he helped her secure her bag to the animal without comment. They rode out of Trinidad heading west just as the last light faded from the sky, and Beatrice did not look back. She had learned long ago that looking back only brought pain. The trail into the San Juan Mountains was indeed difficult, just as Hayes had promised. They rode through the night by moonlight, following a path that wound through narrow canyons and over rocky ridges where one wrong step could send a horse tumbling. Hayes navigated it all with the confidence of long familiarity, occasionally calling back quiet instructions to Beatrice about obstacles ahead. They stopped once to rest the horses and eat some jerky and hardtack from Hayes's saddlebags. They sat on opposite sides of a small clearing, the silence between them not quite comfortable, but not hostile either. Beatrice found herself studying Hayes in the moonlight, trying to reconcile the dangerous bounty hunter who had found her with the man who was now helping her escape. "How long have you been doing this?" she asked finally. "Hunting people for money?" Hayes took a drink from his canteen before answering. 5 years, like I said. Before that, I was a ranch hand down in Texas, but the work dried up after a drought killed most of the cattle. I needed money and I was good at tracking, so I fell into this line of work somewhat by accident. You enjoy it? Hayes considered the question. Sometimes. When I bring in someone who genuinely deserves to be brought in, someone who has hurt others and needs to face justice, then yes, I feel good about what I do. But there are gray areas, cases like yours where the bounty exists but the circumstances are complicated. Those are harder. Yet you do it anyway. A man has to make a living somehow, Hayes said, and I am good at what I do. Better to use my skills for this than for something worse. Beatrice could not argue with that logic, though part of her wondered what Hayes considered worse than hunting human beings for profit. Still, he had helped her when he did not have to, and she was grateful for that even if she did not fully understand his motivations. They reached Hayes's cabin just before dawn, riding into a small valley tucked between towering peaks. The cabin itself was larger than Beatrice had expected, solidly built from logs with a stone chimney and a covered porch. There was a barn for the horses, a small corral, and a creek running nearby. It was remote and isolated exactly as Hayes had described, but it was also oddly peaceful in a way that made Beatrice's shoulders relax for the first time in weeks. It is not much, "But it is safe," Hayes said as he dismounted and began unsaddling his horse. "It is more than I expected," Beatrice admitted. She slid down from Copper's back, her legs stiff from the long ride. "You built this yourself?" "Most of it. Had some help with the barn from a friend who owed me a favor." Hayes led his horse into the barn and Beatrice followed with Copper. The structure was well maintained, with fresh straw in the stalls and tools hung neatly on the walls. Hayes clearly took pride in his property, even if he was rarely here. They worked together in companionable silence to care for the horses, and then Hayes showed Beatrice into the cabin. The interior was sparse but clean, with a large main room that served as kitchen and living space, a small bedroom off to one side, and a loft accessible by a ladder. "You can take the bedroom," Hayes said, setting her carpet bag down inside the door. "I usually sleep in the loft anyway." "I do not want to take your bed," Beatrice protested. "You are not. I prefer the loft. You can see the whole cabin from up there, including both windows and the door. Old habit." Hayes moved to the fireplace and began building a fire from the wood stacked nearby. "Besides, the bedroom has a lock on the door. I thought you might appreciate the privacy." Beatrice felt a surge of gratitude for his thoughtfulness. "Thank you. You are welcome." Hayes got the fire going and then stood, dusting off his hands. "I am going to catch a few hours of sleep. There is food in the pantry if you are hungry, and fresh water in the barrel by the door. Make yourself at home." He climbed the ladder to the loft with the ease of long practice, and within minutes Beatrice heard his breathing even out into sleep. She stood in the middle of the cabin for a long moment, trying to process everything that had happened in the past 24 hours. Yesterday morning she had been Beatrice Palmer, shopgirl and bookkeeper in Trinidad, living a quiet life under an assumed name. Now she was Beatrice Palmer, fugitive from an unjust bounty, hiding in a mountain cabin with a bounty hunter who had inexplicably decided to help her instead of collecting his reward. It was absurd. It was terrifying. It was the most hope she had felt since fleeing Kansas. Beatrice explored the cabin quietly, taking inventory of the supplies. Hayes kept a well-stocked pantry with basics like flour, beans, rice, dried meat, coffee, and even a few luxuries like sugar and molasses. There were blankets, clean clothes in the bedroom that were far too large for her, books on a shelf near the fireplace. Evidence of a life lived in the margins, always ready to pack up and move at a moment's notice. She found herself drawn to the books, running her fingers over the spines. There was a worn copy of Shakespeare's complete works, several dime novels, a book on animal tracking, and surprisingly, a volume of Emily Dickinson's poetry. It was this last that made her pause. She would not have pegged Hayes as the poetry-reading type, but then again, she was learning that she should not make assumptions about him. Exhaustion eventually caught up with her, and Beatrice retreated to the bedroom. True to Hayes's word, there was a lock on the door, though she found herself hesitating before engaging it. He had given her no reason to fear him, had in fact shown her nothing but respect and consideration. Still, old habits died hard, and she turned the lock before collapsing onto the bed fully clothed. She woke to the smell of coffee and the sound of someone moving around in the main room. Sunlight streamed through the bedroom window, and for a disorienting moment, Beatrice had no idea where she was. Then memory returned in a rush, and she sat up quickly, running her hands through her tangled hair. When she emerged from the bedroom, she found Hayes at the stove frying eggs and bacon. He had changed clothes and shaved, and in the bright morning light he looked younger than she had initially thought, perhaps 25 or 26, closer to her own age of 20 than she had realized. "Good morning," he said without turning around. "I hope you are hungry." I made enough for two. Thank you, Beatrice said. She moved to the water barrel and washed her hands and face, grateful for the chance to make herself slightly more presentable. You did not have to cook. I was cooking anyway, and like you said, you are not a burden. Hayes divided the food onto two plates and brought them to the small table. Besides, we need to talk about what happens next, and that is easier to do over breakfast. They ate in silence for a few minutes, and Beatrice was surprised to find that the food was good. Hayes clearly knew his way around a kitchen despite his rough exterior. When they had both taken the edge off their hunger, Hayes set down his fork and looked at her seriously. Here is the situation as I see it, he said. Moreland is not going to give up looking for you. Men like him do not. To him, you are not a person, you are property that escaped, and he will spend whatever it takes to get you back. Beatrice's appetite vanished, but she forced herself to keep eating. She needed her strength. I know. However, we have a few advantages. First, Moreland thinks you are in Trinidad, because that is where I last reported your location before I supposedly lost your trail. He will send men there to look for you, but you are already gone. Second, no one except Mrs. Chen knows you left, and I got the impression she is not the type to volunteer information to strangers. She is not, Beatrice confirmed. Good. That buys us some time. Third, this cabin is off every map and known only to me and one other person who I trust completely. Unless Moreland can track like an Apache and has the determination to search every valley in the San Juan Mountains, he will never find this place. So I just hide here forever. Beatrice heard the bitterness in her own voice. No, Hayes said firmly. You hide here for a few months while I do some digging. Moreland is not a good man, and good men leave trails. I am going to find evidence of his crimes, real evidence that will stand up in a court of law. And then I am going to make sure that evidence gets into the right hands. Beatrice stared at him. You would do that? Risk going back to Kansas and potentially putting yourself in Moreland's crosshairs? I would, Hayes said simply. Because it is the right thing to do and because you deserve justice, not just survival. Something warm unfurled in Beatrice's chest, a feeling she did not dare name. I do not know what to say. You do not have to say anything. Just promise me you will stay here and stay safe while I am gone. Can you do that? Beatrice thought about it, about the isolation and the waiting and the not knowing. But she also thought about the alternative, about constantly running and looking over her shoulder. I can, she said. How long will you be gone? A month, maybe 6 weeks. I need to go back to Santa Fe first to clear some business, and then I will head to Kansas. I will be as quick as I can. A month suddenly seemed like a very long time. What am I supposed to do here all alone for 6 weeks? Hayes stood and began clearing the dishes. Whatever you want. Raid, explore the valley though not beyond it, fish in the creek, tend the garden behind the cabin. There is plenty to keep you occupied if you want to be occupied, or you can just rest and recover from everything you have been through. That would be acceptable too. Beatrice helped him clean up, and then Hayes spent the rest of the day showing her around the property. He taught her how to work the water pump, where he kept various supplies, how to bar the door from the inside if she felt threatened. He showed her the root cellar, stocked with preserved vegetables and salted meat. He even showed her where he kept a rifle and ammunition, making sure she knew how to load and fire it properly. You said you could shoot reasonably well, he said. Show me. They set up targets in the clearing, and Beatrice demonstrated her skills. She was not an expert marksman, but she was competent enough to hit what she aimed at from a reasonable distance. Hayes offered a few pointers to improve her accuracy, standing behind her to adjust her stance and her grip on the rifle. Beatrice was acutely aware of his proximity, of the solid warmth of him at her back, and she had to force herself to concentrate on the target. "Better," Hayes said when she hit 3 shots in a row dead center. "You have a steady hand once you get your positioning right." "My father taught me to shoot before he started drinking away all his money," Beatrice said, lowering the rifle. "It was one of the few useful things he ever did for me." Hayes was quiet for a moment. "I am sorry you had to go through that. No one should be sold off by their own family." "No, they should not," Beatrice agreed. "But it happened, and dwelling on it does not change anything. I am just trying to move forward now." "That is a healthy attitude," Hayes said. He took the rifle from her and headed back toward the cabin. "Come on. I want to show you one more thing before it gets dark." He led her up a narrow trail behind the cabin, climbing steadily through pine forest until they emerged onto a rocky outcropping. The view took Beatrice's breath away. They could see for miles in every direction, mountain peaks stretching to the horizon in shades of blue and purple, the valley below spread out like a green jewel. "This is my thinking spot," Hayes said. "I come up here when I need to clear my head or make a difficult decision. I thought you might appreciate knowing about it." "It is beautiful," Beatrice breathed. They stood side by side watching the sun sink lower, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks. Beatrice felt something shift between them, a subtle change in the air like the moment before a storm breaks. She glanced at Hayes and found him looking at her instead of the sunset, an expression on his face that she could not quite read. "What is it?" she asked softly. Hayes seemed to catch himself, looking away quickly. "Nothing. We should head back before it gets too dark to see the trail." But it was not nothing, and Beatrice knew it. Something had passed between them in that moment, something dangerous and complicated that neither of them was quite ready to acknowledge. She followed Hayes back down the trail in silence, her mind whirling. Hayes left 2 days later, riding out at dawn with promises to return as quickly as possible. Beatrice stood on the cabin porch watching until he disappeared from sight, and then she was alone in the mountains with only her thoughts for company. The first week was difficult. Beatrice was not accustomed to so much solitude, and the silence of the valley seemed oppressive. She kept herself busy with chores, cleaning the cabin from top to bottom even though it was already clean, tending the small garden, fishing in the creek. She read her way through half of Hayes's book collection. She practiced shooting until her shoulder was bruised from the rifle's recoil. But at night, lying in the bedroom with the door locked and the darkness pressing in around her, fear crept back in. She dreamed of Sela's finding her, of being dragged back to Dodge City, of ending up like Rachel. She woke gasping and sweating, her heart racing, and had to remind herself that she was safe, that Sela's did not know where she was, that Hayes was working to make sure she would never have to run again. The second week was easier. Beatrice began to appreciate the peace of the valley, the way the days unfolded at their own pace without urgency or demands. She discovered a grove of wild berry bushes and spent an afternoon picking fruit, returning to the cabin with purple-stained hands and a full basket. She made jam the way her mother had taught her years ago, before her mother died and everything fell apart. The third week she began to explore more widely, though always staying within the boundaries of the valley as Hayes had instructed. She found a waterfall tucked into a side canyon, the pool at its base clear and cold and perfect for swimming. She found a meadow full of wildflowers, their colors so vibrant they almost hurt to look at. She found a sense of peace she had not known in years, and she thought about Hayes. She could not seem to help herself. She thought about his quiet competence, his unexpected kindness, the way he had believed her when he had no reason to. She thought about how he had stood behind her teaching her to shoot, his hands on her shoulders adjusting her stance. She thought about that moment on the outcropping when he had looked at her like she was something precious, something worth protecting. It was foolish, she told herself. She barely knew the man. He was helping her out of some sense of honor or guilt or whatever motivated him, not because he had any personal feelings toward her. And even if he did have feelings, Beatrice had sworn off men after her experience with Silas. She had promised herself she would never let another man have power over her life. But Hayes was not Silas. A treacherous voice in her head whispered. Hayes had given her choice, had respected her autonomy, had made sure she had the means to protect herself. Hayes was nothing like Silas at all. The fourth week dragged. Beatrice found herself watching the trail constantly, hoping to see Hayes returning. Every bird that startled from the trees made her heart leap, thinking it might be a horse approaching. She told herself she was just anxious for news, eager to know if his mission to Kansas had been successful. She told herself it had nothing to do with the way her pulse quickened when she thought of seeing him again. She was a terrible liar, even to herself. Hayes returned on the 40th day, riding into the valley just as the sun was setting. Beatrice was on the porch shelling peas for supper, and she dropped the bowl when she saw him, peas scattering everywhere as she stood up so fast she nearly tripped over her own feet. He looked exhausted, dust-covered and trail-worn, but he was smiling as he dismounted. "Miss Palmer," he said, and there was warmth in his voice that had not been there before. "I am glad to see you looking well." "You are back," Beatrice said, and immediately felt foolish for stating the obvious. "I mean, I was not expecting you quite so soon. Did everything go all right?" "Better than all right," Hayes said. He pulled a leather satchel from his saddlebag and held it up. "I have enough evidence to put Moreland away for a long time, and a federal marshal who is very interested in bringing him to justice. But that is a long story, and I would very much like to get cleaned up and fed before I tell it. Is that fresh bread I smell?" Beatrice had indeed baked bread that afternoon, along with a stew from vegetables she had harvested from the garden. "It is. Go ahead and take care of your horse, and I will have supper ready by the time you are done." They fell into an easy rhythm, Hayes tending to his horse while Beatrice finished preparing the meal. When he came inside 20 minutes later, clean-shaven with his hair still damp from washing at the pump, Beatrice felt her breath catch in her throat. She had forgotten how handsome he was, or perhaps she had never let herself properly notice before. Over supper, Hayes told her everything. He had gone to Kansas and spent 2 weeks carefully investigating Moreland's activities. He had spoken to the girls who worked in Moreland's saloon, several of whom were willing to testify about unpaid wages and worse abuses. He had found evidence of embezzlement from the town's coal mine company, which Moreland part owned. He had even tracked down Rachel's sister, who told him that Rachel had been planning to go to the authorities about Moreland before she died. "The federal marshal is going to Dodge City next week to arrest him," Hayes said. "Once Moreland is in custody, the bounty on you will be voided and you will be free to live wherever you want under your real name." Beatrice set down her fork, suddenly unable to eat. "Free," she repeated, testing the word. "I had almost forgotten what that felt like." "Well, you are about to remember," Hayes said, "and Miss Palmer, I owe you an apology." "For what?" "For initially believing you might be guilty, for pointing a gun at you on that trail, for every moment of fear I caused you before I knew the truth." Hayes looked down at his hands. "I know apologies do not undo harm, but I am sorry nonetheless." "You have nothing to apologize for," Beatrice said firmly. "You were doing your job, and once you knew the truth, you did everything in your power to help me. That is more than most people would have done." They cleaned up from supper together, and then sat on the porch in the gathering twilight. The air was cool and pine-scented, and stars were beginning to emerge in the darkening sky. Beatrice was aware of Hayes sitting close beside her, their shoulders almost but not quite touching. "What will you do now?" Hayes asked. "Once Moreland is arrested and you are free to leave here." It was a question Beatrice had been avoiding thinking about. "I am not certain," she admitted. "I like Trinidad, but I do not know if I can go back there now. Too many memories of looking over my shoulder." "You could stay here," Hayes said quietly. "If you wanted to." Beatrice's heart began to beat faster. "Stay here. But this is your cabin." "It is," Hayes agreed, "but I am not here most of the time. I am usually traveling for work, and the place sits empty for months on end. It seems a shame when someone could be making use of it, someone who needs a safe place to heal and figure out what comes next." "That is a generous offer," Beatrice said carefully, "but I meant what I said before. I will not be anyone's charity case." "I know you did, and I am not offering charity, I am offering partnership." Hayes turned to look at her, his eyes serious in the fading light. "You have spent the past month maintaining this place, improving it. The garden has never looked better, and I noticed you repaired the fence in the corral and organized the barn. You have been working, same as you said you would. I am just suggesting we make the arrangement more permanent." "Partnership," Beatrice repeated. "What exactly would that entail?" "You would live here, maintain the property, keep things running while I am away on jobs. In exchange, you would have a safe home and a share of whatever I earn. We would be business partners, equals." It was tempting, dangerously so, but Beatrice forced herself to consider it carefully. "And what happens when you want to settle down properly? Take a wife. I cannot imagine many women would be pleased to discover you have another woman living in your cabin." Hayes was quiet for a long moment. "I do not think that is something you need to worry about." "Why not?" "Because any woman I would consider marrying would have to understand that my life is complicated and unconventional. And because—" he paused, then continued softly, "because I am not sure I want a conventional life anyway. I like my freedom. I like coming back to these mountains and knowing I have a safe haven waiting. And if that haven came with good company, with someone intelligent and capable who could hold her own in a conversation and was not afraid of hard work, well, that would only make it better." Beatrice felt heat rise in her cheeks. "You are talking about me." "I am talking about you," Hayes confirmed. "These past 6 weeks, I have been thinking about you a great deal, Miss Palmer, wondering if you were safe, if you were settling in all right, if you were lonely up here by yourself. And then I rode in this evening and saw you on the porch, looking so at home, and I realized I had been hoping you would want to stay. I cannot promise I will be easy," Beatrice heard herself say, the words emerging without conscious thought. "I have been through things that have left marks. I have nightmares. I do not trust easily. I have a temper when provoked, and I am stubborn beyond reason. If I stayed here, if we entered into this partnership you are suggesting, I cannot promise it would be simple or smooth." Hayes reached over and took her hand, his grip warm and steady. "I can promise I will stay," he said. "Through the nightmares and the stubbornness and whatever else comes, I will stay, Beatrice, if you will let me." Her name on his lips, her given name without the formal Miss Palmer, sent a shiver through her. "Why?" she whispered. "Why would you make that promise?" "Because somewhere between tracking you across Colorado and watching you take target practice in my clearing and reading the letters you left behind the false panel in the bedroom wall, I started falling for you," Hayes said. "And then I came back here and saw what you had done with the place. Saw the jam jars lined up in the pantry and the flowers you planted by the porch steps, and the book you left open on the table with the corner of the page turned down. And I realized I was already gone. I am in love with you, Beatrice Palmer, and I know it is too soon and probably foolish and certainly inconvenient, But there it is. Beatrice could not breathe. She stared at their joined hands, at the way his thumb was tracing small circles on her wrist. "You found my letters." "I did." "I am sorry for the invasion of privacy, but I was trying to understand you better, and they told me so much about who you are, about your hopes and your fears and the person you want to become." Hayes brought her hand to his lips and kissed her knuckles gently. "You are remarkable, Beatrice. You survived something that would have broken most people, and you came out the other side determined to build a better life. I admire that more than I can say." "I am terrified," Beatrice admitted. "The last man I trusted with my heart sold me like livestock. Before that, my father drank himself to death after my mother passed and took me down with him. I do not have a good track record with men, Hayes." "I know," Hayes said, "and I am not asking you to trust me with everything all at once. I am just asking you to give me a chance to prove that I am different, that I can be steady and true and worthy of you." Beatrice looked up at him finally, searching his face in the starlight. She saw sincerity there and hope, and something that might have been fear. He was taking a risk too, she realized. Opening himself up to possible rejection, it made her feel less alone in her terror. "I cannot say I love you yet," she said slowly. "It is too soon, and I need time to know my own feelings. But I can say that these past 6 weeks, I have thought about you more than I probably should have. I can say that when I saw you riding in this evening, my first emotion was not relief that you had news, but joy that you had come back at all. I can say that the idea of staying here, of building something with you, makes me feel hopeful in a way I have not felt in years." "That is enough," Hayes said. "That is more than enough to start with." He leaned in slowly, giving her plenty of time to pull away, and pressed a kiss to her forehead. It was chaste and sweet, and it made Beatrice want to cry with the gentleness of it. When was the last time someone had touched her with such care? "Stay," Hayes murmured against her skin. "Please stay, Beatrice." "I will stay," she whispered back. "I will stay, Hayes." They sat together on the porch until the stars filled the sky like diamond dust, hands clasped and shoulders touching, not saying much but not needing to. Something fundamental had shifted between them, a door opening onto possibilities that neither had expected but both were willing to explore. The next morning, Hayes rode down to the nearest town to send a telegram to the federal marshal confirming the arrest warrant. He was gone only a few hours, but Beatrice found herself watching the trail anxiously until he returned. When he did, he brought back supplies and a letter that had been waiting for him at the general store. "It is from my sister," he explained as they unpacked the supplies together. "I wrote to her a few weeks ago telling her about you, and she wanted me to pass along her well wishes." "You told your sister about me." Beatrice was touched and a little flustered. "Of course I did. Maria and I tell each other everything." Hayes grinned. "Fair warning, she is going to want to meet you eventually. She is very protective of me and will want to make sure you are good enough for her baby brother." "You have a protective older sister." Beatrice found herself smiling. "I would like to meet her. Anyone who taught you to be the man you are must be remarkable." "She is," Hayes said warmly. "You would like her, I think. She is blunt and funny and does not suffer fools gladly, much like you, actually." They fell into a comfortable routine over the following days. Hayes taught Beatrice more about tracking and wilderness survival, skills he had learned over years of hard experience. Beatrice taught Hayes some recipes her mother had passed down, and they spent an afternoon baking together, flower fights and laughter filling the cabin in a way it probably never had before. In the evenings, they sat on the porch or by the fire and talked. Hayes told her stories about his various bounty hunting adventures, some funny and some harrowing. Beatrice told him about her childhood before everything went wrong, about her mother's kindness and her own dreams of someday running a business of her own. "What kind of business?" Hayes asked. "A bookshop, maybe," Beatrice said. "Or a dress shop, something where I could be independent, make my own money, not rely on anyone else." "You could still do that," Hayes pointed out. "Once this is all settled, you could start a business in one of the towns nearby. I could help with the initial investment." "That would not be a partnership, that would be charity," Beatrice said firmly. "It would be an investment in my business partner's separate venture," Hayes countered, "which I would expect to be paid back with interest, naturally." They argued about it good-naturedly, and eventually agreed that Beatrice would think about what kind of business she might want to start, and they would discuss the details later. It felt good to plan for a future, to imagine a life beyond just surviving. 2 weeks after Hayes's return, a telegram arrived from the federal marshal. Silas Moreland had been arrested on multiple charges including embezzlement, fraud, and complicity in Rachel's death. The investigation had uncovered even more crimes than Hayes had initially documented, and Moreland was facing decades in prison. The bounty on Beatrice had been officially rescinded, and she was free to return to normal life. "It is over," Beatrice said, reading the telegram 3 times to make sure she had understood correctly. "It is actually over." Hayes pulled her into a hug, and Beatrice melted into it, letting herself be held for the first time since this whole ordeal began. She realized she was crying, great heaving sobs of relief and grief and joy all mixed together. Hayes just held her and let her cry, one hand stroking her hair and the other wrapped firmly around her waist. "You are safe now," he murmured. "You are safe and you are free, and no one can ever hurt you that way again." When Beatrice finally pulled back, wiping at her eyes, Hayes was looking at her with such tenderness that it made her breath catch. "Thank you," she said, "for everything. For believing me, for helping me, for giving me a place to heal. I cannot ever repay you." "You do not need to repay me," Hayes said. "Just be happy. That is all I want." Beatrice stood on her toes and kissed him. It was impulsive and probably too soon, but she could not help herself. She needed him to know what she was feeling, needed to express it in a way that words could not capture. Hayes made a surprised sound and then kissed her back, his arms tightening around her waist. It was nothing like kissing Silas had been, those few horrible times he had forced his attentions on her. This was sweet and searching, gentle but with an undercurrent of passion that promised more to come. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Beatrice rested her forehead against Hayes's chest. "I think I might be falling in love with you too," she whispered. "I am terrified and it is probably too fast, but I think it might be happening anyway." "It is all right to be terrified," Hayes said. "I am terrified too, but maybe we can be terrified together and see where that leads us." They spent the rest of the summer building their life together in the mountain valley. Hayes took fewer bounty jobs and spent more time at the cabin, teaching Beatrice everything he knew about the wilderness and learning from her in turn. They expanded the garden, repaired the barn roof, built a second room onto the cabin that could serve as an office or eventually a nursery, though neither of them said that out loud yet. They kissed often but went no further, both of them conscious of Beatrice's past trauma and the need to move slowly. Hayes never pushed, never demanded, always let Beatrice set the pace. It was healing in a way she had not expected, learning to trust her own body and her own desires again. In August, Maria arrived for a visit, bringing her husband Thomas and their 3 children. She was exactly as Hayes had described, warm and funny and fierce, with the same gray-green eyes as her brother. She pulled Beatrice aside on the second day of their visit and said bluntly, "My brother is head over heels for you and I can see why. But if you hurt him, I will hunt you down myself, understand?" "Understood," Beatrice said, amused rather than offended. "For what it is worth, I have no intention of hurting him. He has given me more than I ever thought I would have, and I plan to spend the rest of my life making sure he knows how much that means to me." Maria studied her for a long moment, then nodded. "Good. Then I suppose I should tell you that I have never seen Hayes this happy. Whatever you are doing, keep doing it." They became friends over the course of that week, and when Maria left, she made Beatrice promise to write often and to visit California when she and Hayes could manage it. Beatrice found herself with a sister, something she had never had before, and the gift of it made her eyes sting with grateful tears. As autumn painted the mountains in gold and red, Hayes came to Beatrice one evening with a serious expression. "I have been thinking," he said, "about us, about the future, about what we are building here." Beatrice's heart began to race. "What about it?" "I want to marry you," Hayes said simply. "Not because I think we need a piece of paper to validate what we have, but because I want the world to know that you are mine and I am yours. Because I want to build a life with you properly, with no ambiguity or uncertainty. Because I love you more than I ever thought it was possible to love someone, and I want to spend every day for the rest of my life showing you that." He pulled a simple gold band from his pocket, the metal worn smooth with age. "This was my grandmother's ring. It is not fancy, but it is real, and it has been in my family for 3 generations. If you will have it, if you will have me, I promise to love you and honor you and never give you reason to regret saying yes." Beatrice looked at the ring, at Hayes's hopeful face, at the life they had built together over the past few months. She thought about how far she had come from that terrified girl locked in Silas Moreland's house. She thought about the strength she had found in herself, the courage to keep fighting even when everything seemed hopeless. She thought about Hayes's steadiness, his kindness, the way he had believed in her when no one else did. "Yes," she said, and her voice was strong and sure. "Yes, Hayes, I will marry you. I love you, and I want to build this life with you, and I am not afraid anymore." Hayes slipped the ring onto her finger and kissed her so thoroughly that her knees went weak. "Thank you," he whispered against her lips. "Thank you for trusting me, for staying, for choosing me." "Thank you for not giving up on me," Beatrice replied. "For seeing past the bounty poster to the person beneath. For giving me my life back." They were married in October by a circuit preacher who came through the valley, with Maria and Thomas standing as witnesses. Beatrice wore a simple blue dress that Maria had helped her sew, and Hayes wore his best shirt and a new vest. They exchanged vows under the aspen trees, the leaves falling around them like gold confetti, and when the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, Beatrice felt something settle deep in her soul. She was home. She was safe. She was loved. Their wedding night was gentle and patient, Hayes taking his time to show Beatrice that physical intimacy could be something beautiful rather than something to endure. He was careful with her, attentive to her responses, ready to stop the instant she showed any sign of distress. But there was no distress, only joy and wonder and a growing passion that left them both breathless and laughing. "Are you all right?" Hayes asked afterward, holding her close in the darkness of their bedroom. "I am more than all right," Beatrice said truthfully. "I am happy, Hayes. For the first time in as long as I can remember, I am genuinely, completely happy." Winter came to the mountains with deep snow and bitter cold, but the cabin was snug and warm, and Beatrice and Hayes spent the long evenings by the fire reading aloud to each other or planning for the spring. They talked about expanding their partnership, maybe buying some land in the valley and starting a small ranch. Hayes was thinking about giving up bounty hunting entirely, focusing instead on ranching and guide work for hunters who wanted to explore the mountains. "I am tired of chasing bad men," he admitted. "I want to build something instead, something lasting with you." Beatrice encouraged the idea, secretly thrilled at the thought of having him home more often. She was also harboring a secret of her own, one she planned to reveal once she was certain. Her monthly courses had not come in December, and she was experiencing a persistent queasiness in the mornings that felt suspiciously familiar based on her mother's descriptions of pregnancy. She waited until January to tell Hayes, wanting to be absolutely sure. When she finally said the words, "I think I am going to have a baby," he stared at her in shock for a long moment before sweeping her up into his arms with a whoop of joy. "Are you certain?" he demanded, setting her down carefully. How are you feeling? Do you need anything?" "Should I ride for a doctor?" "I am certain," Beatrice said, laughing at his excitement. "Probably sometime in late summer. I am feeling fine, just a bit queasy in the mornings." "And no, you do not need to ride for a doctor yet, though we will want to arrange for a midwife to be here when the time comes." Hayes placed a hand on her still flat stomach with such reverence that Beatrice felt tears prick her eyes. "We are going to be parents," he said wonderingly. "I am going to be a father." "You are going to be a wonderful father," Beatrice assured him. "You are patient and kind and steady, all the things a child needs." "And you are going to be an amazing mother," Hayes said, "strong and smart and capable of anything." They spent the rest of the winter preparing for the baby. Hayes building a cradle from pine wood and Beatrice sewing tiny clothes and blankets. Maria sent a care package of baby items along with a letter full of advice and congratulations. The cabin was filled with anticipation and joy. In late spring, Beatrice opened her bookshop in the nearby town of Durango. It was small, just 2 rooms above a general store, but it was hers. Hayes had insisted on providing the initial investment, calling it their joint venture, and Beatrice had agreed on the condition that she would pay him back once the shop became profitable. She stocked the shelves with books ordered from Denver and Santa Fe, everything from popular novels to practical guides to volumes of poetry. The shop was an immediate success. The people of Durango were hungry for reading material, and Beatrice's knowledge and enthusiasm made her a natural bookseller. She worked 3 days a week at the shop, while Hayes managed the ranch they had started with a small herd of cattle. On the days she worked, Hayes would ride into town with her and help around the shop, lifting heavy boxes and charming customers with his easy manner. "You are good at this," Beatrice told him one afternoon as he helped a young boy select an adventure novel. "Maybe you missed your calling as a shopkeeper." "I think my calling is following you around and supporting whatever you decide to do," Hayes said with a grin. "It is a good calling. I recommend it highly." Their son was born in August on a sweltering afternoon, arriving quickly after a relatively short labor. Hayes was there the whole time, holding Beatrice's hand and wiping her forehead with a cool cloth. When the midwife finally placed the squalling infant in Beatrice's arms, she looked down at his red, wrinkled face and fell instantly, completely in love. "What should we name him?" Hayes asked, his voice thick with emotion as he ran a gentle finger over the baby's downy head. "Henry," Beatrice said without hesitation. It had been her father's name before the drinking had changed him back when he had been a good man who loved his family. "Henry James Yancy." "Henry James," Hayes repeated. "I like it. Hello, Henry. Welcome to the world, little man." The years that followed were full and rich. Henry grew into a curious, energetic boy who loved exploring the mountains with his father and listening to his mother read stories in the bookshop. Beatrice's business flourished, and she eventually expanded to include a small lending library. Hayes proved to be a natural rancher, and their herd grew steadily. When Henry was 3, Beatrice gave birth to twin girls, Alina and Margaret, who arrived screaming and pink and perfect. Hayes was wonderfully outnumbered and seemed to revel in it, letting his daughters wrap him around their tiny fingers from day one. They added onto the cabin twice more, eventually turning it into a proper house with multiple bedrooms and a large kitchen where the family gathered for meals. Hayes built Beatrice a small writing desk by the window where she could keep the bookshop accounts and write letters to Maria and the friends she had made in Durango. Sometimes, usually late at night when the children were asleep and the house was quiet, Beatrice would think back to that day in the canyon when Hayes had first found her. She would remember the fear, the desperation, the certainty that her life was over. And then she would look at the life she had built, at the man sleeping peacefully beside her, at the sounds of her children breathing softly in the next room, and she would marvel at how wrong she had been. Her life had not ended that day. It had begun. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Hayes took Beatrice back up to the outcropping behind their house, the thinking spot he had shown her all those years ago. The view was the same, mountains stretching to forever, but everything else had changed. "You ever regret it?" Hayes asked. "Choosing this life, choosing me." Beatrice looked at him, at the silver starting to thread through his dark hair, at the lines around his eyes from years of squinting into the sun and smiling. "Not for a single moment," she said honestly. "You saved me, Hayes. You gave me back my life and then you helped me build something better than I ever dreamed possible." "You saved yourself," Hayes corrected. "I just happened to be there at the right time. Everything else, everything good and beautiful that we have built, that is all you, Beatrice. Your strength, your courage, your determination to not let your past define your future." They stood together watching the sunset, just as they had a decade earlier, and Beatrice felt the same sense of peace that had eluded her for so long. She had been right to take the leap of faith, right to trust Hayes when every instinct told her not to trust anyone. He had kept his promise. Through 10 years of marriage, through the challenges and joys of building a life together, through 3 children and a business and a ranch and all the 1,000 small moments that made up a life, he had stayed. And she had stayed too, no longer running, no longer afraid. She had planted roots in this mountain valley, deep and strong, and she had built a family and a home and a future worth fighting for. "I love you," she told Hayes, the words as true now as they had been the first time she said them. "I love you too," Hayes replied, pulling her close. "Always have, always will." Years continued to pass in the way they do, marked by the changing seasons and the growth of their children. Henry grew tall and serious, with his father's skill for tracking and his mother's love of books. Alina was wild and fearless, more comfortable on horseback than anywhere else. Margaret was quiet and observant, with a gift for drawing that had them sending away to Denver for proper art supplies. When Henry turned 18, he announced his intention to go to college in Denver to study law. Beatrice was proud and terrified in equal measure, remembering her own journey at that age, but Hayes just clapped their son on the shoulder and said he could not wait to have a lawyer in the family. The girls showed no interest in leaving the mountains, both of them falling in love with local boys and marrying young. Alina married a rancher's son and settled on the property next to theirs, while Margaret married the new schoolteacher and moved into town. Within a few years, grandchildren began arriving, and the house was once again filled with the sounds of young voices. Beatrice sold the bookshop when she turned 50, ready to spend more time at home and with her expanding family. The woman who bought it was young and enthusiastic, reminding Beatrice of herself all those years ago. She hoped the shop would bring the new owner as much joy as it had brought her. Hayes finally retired from all outside work, focusing entirely on the ranch and his family. His hair had gone completely silver, and his movements were a bit slower, but his eyes still lit up whenever Beatrice entered a room. They were growing old together, just as they had promised. One evening, sitting on the porch watching the sunset for the 1,000th time, Hayes reached over and took Beatrice's hand. His grip was still strong, still steady, even after all these years. "Thank you," he said quietly. "For what?" Beatrice asked. "For staying. For building this life with me. For every single day of the past 40 years. Hayes brought her hand to his lips and kissed it gently. "You are the best thing that ever happened to me, Beatrice Yancy." "No," Beatrice said, her eyes filling with happy tears. "We are the best thing that ever happened to each other." And it was true. From that desperate day in the canyon to this peaceful evening in their twilight years, they had faced everything together. Hayes had kept his promise to stay through all of it, through the easy times and the hard times, through joy and sorrow and everything in between. And Beatrice had learned that while she might not always be easy, that was all right, because love was not about being easy. It was about being true, being steady, being willing to fight for each other and with each other and alongside each other no matter what came. They sat together as the stars emerged one by one, just as they had done thousands of times before, hands clasped and hearts full. In the house behind them, they could hear their grandchildren playing and their daughters laughing. Beyond the valley, the mountains stood eternal and unchanging, bearing witness to the life they had built in their shadow. It was a good life. It was a beautiful life. And it was theirs, hard-won and cherished, built on a foundation of trust and courage and a promise kept. Hayes had promised to stay, and he had. Beatrice had promised to let him, and she had. And in the end, that was all they had needed. A promise, and the determination to keep it, day after day, year after year, until their individual stories had become one shared story, written in the language of love and commitment and the quiet certainty that they had found in each other exactly what they had been searching for all along. The night deepened around them, but they stayed on the porch a while longer, reluctant to leave the magic of the moment. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges and joys, and the day after that, and all the days that followed until their last. But that was all right, because they would face those days together, just as they had faced everything else. Together, steady and true, keeping their promises, loving each other through it all. And that, Beatrice thought as Hayes squeezed her hand gently in the starlight, was the greatest gift anyone could ask for. Not a life without hardship or struggle, but a life shared with someone who would stay through it all, who would choose you every single day without hesitation or regret. She had been so afraid when she first met Hayes, so certain that trusting him would be a mistake. But he had proven her fears wrong in every possible way. He had been patient when she needed patience, strong when she needed strength, gentle when she needed gentleness. He had seen her at her worst and loved her anyway. He had believed in her when she had barely believed in herself, and in return she had given him everything she had: her trust, her love, her loyalty, her future. She had built a life with him that neither of them could have built alone. She had given him children and grandchildren, a full house and a full heart. She had stayed even when staying was hard, even when old fears threatened to resurface, even when the easy thing would have been to run. They had both kept their promises in the end. And those promises had carried them through 40 years of marriage and into old age with no regrets, no what-ifs, no looking back with sorrow. As they finally rose to go inside, Hayes paused to kiss her one more time, slow and sweet and full of all the love that still burned bright between them after all these years. Beatrice kissed him back, grateful beyond words for this man, this life, This chance she had been given to start over and get it right. Inside the house, their family waited, the legacy of their love made manifest in children and grandchildren who bore their features and their values. Outside, the mountains stood guard over the valley, eternal and protective. And between those two realities, Beatrice and Hayes Yancy walked hand in hand into their house, closing the door on another beautiful day and looking forward to all the beautiful days still to come. Their story, which had begun with fear and flight and a bounty that should never have existed, had transformed into something extraordinary. A love story, yes, but more than that. A story about healing and hope and the power of choosing to believe in something better. A story about promises kept and trust earned and the quiet, steady work of building a life worth living. And when Beatrice finally drifted off to sleep that night, safe in Hayes's arms in the bed they had shared for 40 years, she did so with a smile on her face and peace in her heart. She had found what she had been searching for without even knowing she was searching. She had found home and love and the courage to claim both. The Wild West had been wild indeed, full of danger and injustice and harsh realities. But it had also given her this, given her Hayes, given her a chance to become the woman she was meant to be. And for that, she would be forever grateful. Their story had a happy ending, the kind that only comes from hard work and dedication and a willingness to fight for what matters. And as the years continued to unfold, that ending would only grow sweeter, enriched by more memories and more love and more proof that they had chosen well when they chose each other. Hayes had promised to stay, and he had stayed. Beatrice had warned him she would not be easy, and she had not been easy. But together, they had been perfect, two flawed and complicated people who somehow fit together like pieces of a puzzle designed specifically for them. And that was how their story ended, or rather how it continued on, because love stories like theirs do not really end. They just keep going, day after day, promise after promise, kiss after kiss, until the very end and perhaps even beyond. In the mountains of Colorado, in a valley that only they knew how to find, Beatrice and Hayes Yancy built a life that would stand as testament to the power of love and loyalty for generations to come. And every day, in ways large and small, they kept their promises to each other. He stayed. She stayed. And together, they created something beautiful,